Hey guys, sorry I couldn't be there tonight. Right about now, I'm probably on a plane to California for our HOSA competition. I hope all of y'all survived the tropical storm Bill that happened last weekend and why we couldn't have class. So I wanted to go ahead and videotape my part of the presentation so that my group members didn't have to do that. So as you know, we're now to the DAEP part of the presentation. So just real quick, if you can read these questions up here, jot them down, do a little think, pair, share. So thoughts: why can your students be placed into DAEP? What does your district's DAEP look like? And then how long are your students usually placed in DAEP? Hope the video thing doesn't get so super annoying. If it does, have them shut me off and they can just talk through it. But the good thing about this is maybe there won't be a lot of discussion so we can get out of here early. Anyway, so y'all take a second to answer those questions, and whenever they are ready, they will play me again. Maybe. We'll see. All right, go ahead and pause. Okay, so hopefully y'all have had a good chance to talk about some of the things in your own classroom or our own school district. So let's move on. Maybe it'll let me move on. Come on, thing. Let's go down here and move on. Okay, so why can students be put into DAEP? So there's two different kind of tracks that they can go on. There's mandatory placement and then there's discretionary placement, which we'll talk about both of those. So first off, with mandatory placement to DAEP, if these 7 actions listed right here happen in these 3 areas, then that is a mandatory removal to DAEP. So you can see that if there's a certain drug offense that happens within 300 feet of the school property, that is a mandatory placement into DAEP. Of those 7 things, if they happen either at school within 300 feet of the school property or at the school-sponsored event, then that is a mandatory placement in DAEP. So you can kind of read through those 7 real quick. And then there was also a little disclaimer in there that says if the school does not expel the student based on the behavior, they must be placed into DAEP. So this is a non-negotiable mandatory placement. And so everybody also knows that DAEP is not something that the parents or students choose. This is a place that students are assigned to go because of their behaviors. And if you're so curious, in the Texas Education Code Section 37, it's .006 that lists why the students can be put into DAEP. So mandatory DAEP, regardless of where it happens, if these 5 things happen, regardless if they're on campus or at an event or not, then they are put into DAEP. So false alarm or report involving a public school, terroristic threat, so those bomb threats or those threats, that there's going to be an attack on the school or something like that. If they commission a felony offense under Title V, and I pulled up the list of what Title V felonies are. I know Cobby talked about their actions against someone. So aggravated assault, indecency with a child, abandoning or endangering a child, improper photography. Who knew? Also listed on here, number 4 is aggravated robbery, and then retaliation against a school employee. So if those happen anywhere, then they are automatically put into DAEP. In our text, it also talked about in the matter of BM 1999, which this was kind of interesting. So in this case, an administrator asked the student to take a red rag out of his back pocket because it was a violation of dress code because it showed gang affiliation. Well, the student did that, and when he asked the administrator to give it back to him, the administrator said no, and then the student told him that he was going to go get his gun and shoot him. So that is retaliation against a school employee. It is mandatory placement into DAEP, and it's important to know that even though this case happened on campus, if the student had done that, at the local Walmart, it would still be a mandatory placement in DAEP. All right, so next we have discretionary placements. So a student can be put into DAEP if they commit an off-campus felony other than those covered by Title V. Reasons other than those listed in state law, provided that the code of conduct tells the student that DAEP might occur. This is something that in their student handbook, it probably lists reasons why students can be put into DAEP. And then lastly, an evidence of an arrest and a finding, meaning the hearing provided by the school, the student can either be expelled to JJ or put into DAEP. In order for these discretionary placements to happen, it's important that the school determine that continued presence of the student in the regular classroom would threaten the safety of other teachers or students as well. Okay, moving on. Registered sex offenders. It's kind of crazy to me that there is their own little clause about registered sex offenders. These are students that are registered sex offenders. So if the student is under court supervision, then they must be either in JJ or put into the campus DAEP. Once they are no longer under the supervision, then the school district has the discretion if they want to put them into DAEP or not. So if they're put into DAEP, the district must review the student's case at the end of every semester. And they also said that the committee that reviews the student's case at the end of every semester, if they are special ed, then their ARD committee would serve as their reviewing body. Law enforcement requirements. So at our school, at Lake Travis, we do have SROs on campus. We obviously live in a small community out in Lakeway, and so we have pretty good relationships with the law enforcement there in Travis County Sheriff's Department. So there is a big connection between the school and the law enforcement, and that's really important. So it is actually required by Chapter 37 that there's communication between the school and law enforcement. Law enforcement is required to give notice to the superintendent within 24 hours after the arrest of a student or before the next day, whichever one is sooner. And then following that, a written notice within 7 days. And this was kind of interesting that the superintendent is entitled to rely on the reports from law enforcement. So let's say a student is pulled over for speeding, they search his car and they find marijuana. The superintendent or the principal doesn't have to do their own investigation. They can use that information that law enforcement found as truth. They don't have to do their own searching. School districts, on the flip side, must notify the juvenile board when a student commits an offense that requires DAEP or expulsion. So anytime a student is placed into DAEP, they have to let the juvenile board know that that has happened. And then lastly, reasonable suspicion of drugs or weapons must also be reported. So it doesn't say that the student has to be caught with the drugs or weapons. There just has to be reasonable suspicion. And then they have to let law enforcement know, hey, we think this kid might be dealing or, something like that. Okay, so how long is too long in DAEP? It's kind of crazy. The state law has no limitations, but it must be defined in the Student Code of Conduct. So your own school district should have in writing how long DAEP placements will be depending on what the offense is. However, the law does say that school must review the student's academic status at intervals not to exceed 120 days. That is a very long time. Some of your discussion that you probably had at the very beginning of this talked about how long does your school put students in DAEP. I can't imagine that anybody would put them in 120 days continuously. Now, let's say they get their time extended because of behavior that they have participated in while they're in DAEP. That might be a reason, but that's a very long time. So the student can be kept into DAEP beyond the end of the school year, only if they're shown to be dangerous or have engaged in serious misbehavior. And they can be kept in DAEP beyond 1 year if after review they're still a threat to the campus. I can't imagine that it would get this far for DAEP. I would hope that if the student is that much of a threat to campus, that they're placed into JJ, AEP, or some other program to get them the help that they need. Okay, so the case that it talked about in our book, Navarez versus San Marcos ISD. Hey, Jason, sorry we stole your thunder on this one. So Timothy Navarez was arrested for off-campus conduct. He was actually throwing rocks at a car, and it injured the passenger of a vehicle. So the superintendent put him into DAEP. The parents decided to sue. I'm going to have to put this into two or several different video clips, so I apologize for that. It's a free program. We'll go ahead and pause that, and we'll come back and talk about Navarez versus San Marcos.